clearer is that the Bible does have its roots in the history of the Near East. So, a much deeper study is necessary before we can get to the true source of the faith of Israel. In particular, the sensational discoveries at Ebla are forcing the world to consider more seriously than ever before the historical reality of the patriarchs, especially Abraham. He was still utilizing the work of Ebla here. So it's an interesting thing how, I'm on page 52, recent Abraham studies insist that something very significant was going on back there. And this, of course, leads to our being more and more frustrated because we're unable to find out what it was. You see, they're saying, wow, there was a lot of movement, a lot of activity. There's a lot of archaeological materials here being discovered. Something was there. Something was happening, man. But we just can't figure it out. The big problem is how the stories got down to us. Are these stories that we're getting now, are these preserved out of a wealth of tales because they are peculiarly relevant as articles of faith? Are they declarations of principle and sermons? Well, we know they're edifying stories, but of course. And they would have been preserved for that reason if for no other. But does it follow that they are fables? And if they are fables, why do they lay such insistence on a particular time, a particular place, and on particular historical conditions? What is at a loss to explain is why three different versions of intrigue between Abraham and a king involving his wife are told. And the question now is, how are these three different stories about this same situation, using the same personages in the same place at the same time, how are these all related, you see? And what is this idea of a rivalry between a mighty royal king and virtually disenfranchised aliens from another country? What's going on? Why are they telling this story? There's something significant because it has been handed down. And then on pages 53 and 54 and 55, in the discussion between the historical Abraham and the mythical Abraham, of course, everyone likes to, the biblical scholars and archaeologists love to have firm dates in place. Yes, we have to deal with chronology, and heavens knows that the chronology of the ancient world is so messed up. We have so many different chronologies. Manetho's chronology of ancient Egypt, and the Old Testament chronology, supposedly, and the king lists from Sumeria, Mesopotamia, and the Akkadians, and Babylonian king lists. But it's important to try to figure out this chronological aspect. And of course, Nibley shows through the next few pages that it's an absolute mess. And it is. Colin Renfrew's work on Indo-European archaeology and the chronology, and Marija Gimbutas. There's just so much that we just don't know. And what we think we do know really isn't accurate chronology after all, you know. So, this principle is we're trying to analyze the texts to find out where do we stand. And Nibley says on page 55, ever since Albright's dating of Abraham collapsed, according to T.L. Thompson, there has been a lack of any real consensus. So today we can only conclude that the patriarchal narratives appear to have taken shape in some still unsatisfactorily explained manner. We just don't get it yet. We're working on it, but we still don't have it. And he says possibilities are infinite. He even concludes like this. He says, scholarly preferences are irrelevant. Now, see, this is something the critics are now saying. They're saying, well, see, all of the scholars are arguing against the LDS scriptures and all. Well, scholarly preferences are irrelevant, though, you see. So they don't have the last word, of course. And so this is the principal idea behind his discussing Joseph Smith and the sources. Number one, there are now an amazing amount of sources available for any serious, fruitful study of the LDS scripture called the Book of Abraham. And the other aspect is William F. Albright, the world's greatest biblical archaeologist, had a fairly well built up archaeological consensus on the rough estimation of when and where the patriarchal narratives about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob occurred, and now that's kind of been refuted. I don't know if it's been refuted, but they're going beyond that. And so now, with the information that we have, based on the archaeological remains that we've found and the ones that we're interpreting, there is no real agreement. Some people date Abraham back to 2000. Some people date him to 1400. I mean, you're talking a 600-year gap there, you know. That is seriously significant. That's a longer time difference than the time difference between us and the Pilgrims in the 1600s who first came to America. That's the difference in time between us and Christopher Columbus. Now, that's a long difference. That's a huge difference. And Nibley is not trying to confuse us. He's saying, look, let's take a realistic look about where we are, about what we know about Abraham, about his time, and about his place. And other scholars have come out and said, now look, you cannot study the Old Testament environment in isolation. You have to include the Egyptian and the Mesopotamian and the Ugaritic and the Hittite and the Greek. I mean, it all coincides. And the ancient Canaanite. See, Frank Moore Cross was huge on that. And right now, Marquez Smith is red hot on that, on the serious Canaanitish connection with ancient Israel. And all of this is making a hash of the biblical surety and the archaeological proofs that we had about the Bible, because now everything's changing yet again. So there's no consensus. And so we have to be careful when we say, well, yes, Abraham's been proven completely false in the myth anyway, so what's Joseph Smith doing making up some wing-ding story about him? Big deal. So it meets a few ancient sources. Abraham was a myth anyway. You see, I do know some critics who contend that. But that's not necessarily the final conclusion either. Everything is up in the air, unfortunately, at this point. What is not up in the air is the fact that there are several different sources from several different times dealing with this particular and peculiar story, events happening in Abraham and Sarah's and Isaac's lives that are not in the Bible, but are actually part of a genuine ancient tradition going way back into hoary antiquity. So thank you for joining me in my Backyard Professor podcast series. I'm thoroughly enjoying helping you understand Hugh Nibley's materials. I'll see you on the next podcast, and in the meantime, have a great life.